Hello and welcome to today's planter session. Does church planting actually work? Brought to you by Geneva Push. My name is Ben McKecken. I'm going to be your moderator today. Now, throughout our presentation, we're warmly inviting you to interact with our speakers by typing in questions using the question pane that's in front of you in the control panel. We'll be answering these questions live straight after the initial interview today, so make sure you get your questions in early. Also, we're recording today's session and we're going to make the link to the video available 24 hours after this event. We'll let you know all the details via email. Now, before we get underway today, we'd really like to thank EA Insurance for making this webinar possible. Now, if you haven't sorted out the insurance side of church planting, but we'd really recommend you start with a chat with EA. They can help you sort out everything from public liability to building, property and contents insurance, as well as let you know about the issues you haven't even thought about yet. So go straight to ea.org.au. Now, let me introduce our host for today's webinar, Al Stewart. He's a founding director of Geneva. He's a church planter, and he's a man with decades of frontline ministry experience. Good morning to you, Al.
Good morning, Ben. Nice to be with
you.
Hello.
Mate, fantastic to be with you. Now, can you please introduce us to our expert guest who's going to be walking us through, does church planting actually work?
Okay, thanks, Ben. It's my great pleasure to welcome my good friend Mikey Lynch this morning. Mikey lives down in beautiful Tasmania. Hello, Mikey. Let me give a proper intro for you, mate. I've got your bio here. Let me take people through it. I didn't realise just how much you get done in a week. Mikey was one of the founding leaders of Crossroads Presbyterian Church, where he's been a pastor for the last 6 years. Mike is also the team leader of the University Fellowship of Christians on the Hobart campus in the University of Tasmania. That's linked up with AFES, for those who know that great organisation. Mike is one of the founding directors of Geneva Push. It's been a pleasure to work with him for the last 4 years. He's also a founding member of Vision 100, Church Planting Network Committee in Tasmania, and a network coordinator for the Ministry Training Strategy in Tasmania. He's also an assistant chaplain at the Jane Franklin Hall at the university. He's married to Nikki, and they have 3 very cute kids. So special welcome to you, Mikey.
Thank you.
Okay, now, mate, compared to me, you're still a very young man, and you've had a lot of experience in frontline church planting. For people listening today, can you just give us a kind of a thumbnail sketch for your background in starting churches, what you've been involved in?
Yeah, I came to faith in Christ in late high school through the university ministry. So I didn't come from a Christian background, and I think it's quite a common thing for people, especially who've gone off the rails during their teen years, to find it a little hard to relate to a Christian youth group. But we did find that having had contact with church and the university ministry really grabbed us and grabbed many of my friends' attention. So in late high school, I came to faith in Christ through the ministry of Phil and Joe Dow and Pete Woodcock and David Jones, and was kind of more or less just converted into doing ministry. So many of our friends became Christians that those who were keen to lead and minister just began to do it. And as that groundswell reached a certain point, we were more or less running a church within an established church, and it got to a point where the leaders of the denomination gave support to planting a whole new church. And so David Jones, together with a bunch of us, founded Crossroads Presbyterian in the year 2000. I was still studying at uni then, 20 years old, but was one of the founding elders and preachers of Crossroads. So I was involved in establishing all of that. And then a year later, 2001, Crossroads started Cornerstone, which was a more family-oriented thing, and that was done in partnership with a Reformed church. And then over the next...
So that's the
Cornerstone Presbyterian. So these are both Presbyterian churches, that's right.
Very good.
Yeah, and then over the next 10 years, a string of other church plants took place. So Cornerstone started 2 daughter churches, Mount Stewart in around 2005, 2006, and Soul Church in, I think, around 2009. Crossroads as well started an international church, which ended up becoming an AFES focus ministry. And we also started a string of other ministries and church plants that were shut down at various times. So that's my experience and history with Crossroads and church planting.
Okay, so I've just been writing that down. That's at least six new churches that had started, and some others that started but didn't necessarily continue.
Yeah.
Okay.
An exciting thing was with Crossroads and Cornerstone, there was enough momentum to see the granddaughter church start, and that's a special thing in a church planting network. It's one thing to start a bunch of churches, but if a church plant can start a church, you've got something quite special going on, and so that's really exciting.
Yeah. Okay. So what's Vision 100, mate? That's for those of us who aren't from Tassie and may not have heard of that.
The Vision 100 network was really the fruit of St John's Presbyterian Church and the Christian Reformed Church of Kingston beginning to think about the need for cooperative church planting work in Tasmania. The 100 was picking up on that kind of 10% vision idea of what would it take to work towards seeing 10% of the state in churches. And it's an interdenominational ministry across the state now. We have 15 churches in the network now across the state, and a number of other parachurch ministries and conferences. But of that, 9 of those churches are new churches, church plants, which is just a really exciting thought. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I guess we again from early on we sort of began with a small number of leaders, but through ministry training and raising up leaders, saw the number of then leaders and staff growing across that network as well.
Okay. Is it unusual? How many different denominations working together? There's the Reformed churches and the Presbyterians.
The vast majority of the Vision 100 network is Christian Reformed churches or Presbyterian churches, although we're kind of building stronger and stronger ties with independent Reformed churches, Baptist churches, Anglican churches, Brethren churches, and so on. So although the kind of the thick centre would be the Presbyterian Reformed churches, there's a much larger kind of network that we're connected with. It's terrific.
That's unusual, and has that affected morale? Like, what I mean is, I guess, working across denominations, have you found that to be a positive thing? Does it help with momentum?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's always cultural differences between denominations and suspicions and wariness between denominations, and that's just, humans are tribal, and you just got to deal with that. You can't pretend that's not the case. And so you need to make allowances for that to some extent, be realistic about that. But the great thing about having a network across denominations is the opportunities for just idea sharing, resourcing, finding places for people who may not fit with your own ministry culture, but will fit quite well in one of those other denominations. You get that transferring across happen, and so we've seen people who've come up through Presbyterian churches go across to Reformed churches or Anglican churches and so on. Baptist, there was a guy that worked with me as an apprentice, but with strong Baptist convictions, and he went away, trained for ministry, and is now leading a Baptist church here in Hobart. And so that's part of that excellent thing, is allowing for that, people finding places where they can serve according to their convictions while keeping a larger kind of evangelical unity.
Yes. It just seems like such common sense, doesn't it? And yet,
well, I mean, historically, whenever the gospel gets warm, you not only have healthy denominations, but also parachurch and interdenominational efforts. Whenever there's a real growth and energy to the gospel, those sorts of enterprises just start springing up through history. I think it's a good thing.
Yes, what unites us is so much stronger than what so often does. What I'd like to do is take you through, or take the folks listening through, some stats on just the obvious need for more gospel work in Australia, and then some stats on churches, church planting, and just get your response. So I'm aware people say, they say lies, damn lies, and statistics. Let me walk you through, or walk everyone through some stats on just the obvious need for stronger, more vibrant churches in Australia, and then I'd like to get your response on why church planting and why you did what you did, or why you're doing what you're doing in Tassie. So in terms of an obvious need, in the 2011 census, 61% of people claim to be Christian, but obviously nominal. So not all, but a great many of those 61% would be just nominal, tick the box. Now that's declined from 74% about 20 years earlier. So we are kind of slipping away. You can see that in the 2011, 22% of people ticked the no religion box, which has actually doubled from 1991. Church attendance on any one Sunday, maybe 8% of Australians head off to church, which is still a lot of people, but it's just been, well, I don't know if decimated is the word, but 1966, you see, there were 4 times as many Australians in church. Now, that 8% will include churches of every kind and brand, not just evangelical or Protestant churches. As you would kind of expect, the younger age group is underrepresented in Australian church life. Some churches do particularly well with teenagers and young adults, but across the board we're underrepresented. But I think overall it's decline in people's involvement with institutional religion. I don't think there's much decline in Australians believing in God or having some kind of spiritual beliefs, but it's just a lack of engagement. In terms of starting new churches, at Geneva, we sent around an email to a whole lot of people that we know and asking where did people think we needed new churches planted, and got back at least 100 replies. So there's 100 different places that Scott Sanders at Geneva could say we need a church planted tomorrow. Given that there's 2 or 3% maybe of people in Bible-based churches across the country, pretty much anywhere needs new churches.
Looked like that slide was a little bit dead there, Al. We didn't have the full list, but there's...
It was a little bit flat, wasn't it?
I think it was MTS that originally did the shout-out, and I think you can see the image on the MTS website somewhere, I reckon.
Thank you. Yep, okay.
Yeah, so people can probably Google it to track it down, yeah.
Okay, well, if you just imagine names written all over the Australian map, that's what we've got. The NCLS stats show there's all sorts of things that kind of, if you like, get a jump start with church planting. My standard cliched rant is every church in Australia began as a church plant. We just forget because we built them out of sandstone. I won't. We got. Let me see if we can get the stats up about how effective church plants are. Once again, there's probably too many numbers to take in here. Basically, what it's saying is internally, church plants begin with energy and vision, and there's a spiritual vitality that comes. Sometimes our existing churches can be kind of just going through the motions. I don't think that's unfair to say that. And a new church is often hungry and struggling to survive, and there's a kind of a vitality there. And also, outwardly, there's people at church plants statistically are often more likely to be willing to share their faith or to invite someone to church, to include them. Sometimes it's just the desperation of staying afloat, to be really honest. And then one more slide about how effective church plants are. This is an interesting stat, isn't it? That if being a newcomer means that you weren't attending another church 5 years earlier, so you've been out of circulation or never in circulation for at least 5 years. For a non-church plant, only 8% of people, the NCLS stats say, have joined in the last 5 years. Church plants double that, although still only 17%. Now, there's a whole lot of stats, and you can make statistics say anything. When you actually move to your experience and the reality that you've found, Mikey, why is it that you and Vision 100 decided to start new churches rather than work at revitalising the existing church? Now,
I mean, we've heard some of those stats. Yeah, we did come across some of those stats, and that was definitely part of the thing. But I think you need more than stats to really move convictions and emotion to really get into action. For us, there was a large theological imperative that when you really meditate on the truths of the gospel, it drives you towards multiplying ministries, which eventually leads to planting churches, I believe. I think when you consider Christ as risen, he's the Lord of all the world, so there's this kind of vacuum that needs filling across the whole world to claim it for Christ. When you think that Christ is risen, and so that, like in Stephen's speech and vision in Acts, that relativizes human-made structures, whether it's temples or priesthoods or denominations, that Christ, the heavenly Lord, rules over and above all. There's a certain kind of softening and relativizing of any given structure and establishment. Again, in Acts, not only is one of the motifs the word spreading, but also when you think of the upper room, to the disciples, to the deacons, to the partners of Paul traveling back to Jerusalem, to that one of the motifs of Acts is that as the word grows, so does the ministry of the word and the ministers of the word. And so if you've got this vision of multiplying ministry and multiplying ministers and Christ's lordship above and beyond all human worlds and structures, then I think that drives you out to a point that sooner or later you need to multiply churches. Or from another point of view, just the simple thing that the gospel gathers not just converts, it gathers the church. As people are converted, they're converted, brought to Christ and gathered together with one another around Christ. And so those are the theological convictions that were just already there. The statistics, we'd heard various parts of that through the 90s. We'd come across audio and books from Tim Keller, Philip Jensen, Steve Timmis wrote a little book called Multiplying Churches that we read, perhaps with Tim Chester. And a report from Craig Tucker and others who did a church planting report for the Presbyterian Church in New South Wales. So there was a bunch of kind of things that were feeding us in those ways. But experientially, we felt the necessity locally. There was a growing number of converts and young leaders, and there was a need to create platforms for ministry for us and opportunities for us to bring our friends and continue the work of evangelism amongst our contacts. There was a real awareness that not only do we have regions that are unreached, as you say, every church in Australia in a new region had to be planted at some point, but also there's subcultures and substrata in society. So, churches were planted as our cities grew outward, but they then need to be kind of replanted back inward as the nature of the inner suburbs and the inner city changes, and that work wasn't done by the denominations. They assumed that the church planted there, during the colonial era was enough, rather than saying, well, no, we need to go back in now and reach the new ethnic and social and cultural demographics. We could see how much help it gives not only the church plant but the mother church to be thinking outwardly, thinking evangelistically, thinking training leaders. It creates that gospel urgency for the mother church and the daughter church. And also we noticed that to some extent church plants become like the R&D department for a local region, that the church plants are dumb enough to try things that everyone else says won't work, and then they work. And so then the others go, oh, well, we'll give that a shot as well. And so there was all those things that were kind of going around in our head, and there was a certain sense of obviousness to it, I suppose, that it just seemed to make sense of both our theological convictions and practical needs.
Okay, well, there's a lot of things there. Can I just dive into a couple of those things? What do you mean planted? You start new churches as cities grow outwardly in terms of geography. What do you mean about planting back inward and subcultures? Can you give us an example about why you need a new church in an existing suburb?
I mean, ethnic one is obviously a case, right? If you have a suburb that becomes more diverse ethnically, then established more white church in an area that's becoming more diverse will struggle to reach those new ethnic groups in a way that a new church built from the ground up to reach those groups. So Crossroads itself, beginning an international ministry, was recognizing to reach Korean and mainland Chinese international students with 50-minute sermons spoken to English as first language post-Christian Westerners, wasn't quite going to work, you know. And so even then we realised we needed to, in order to reach that demographic of international students, we need a different level of English, a different set of cultural assumptions to connect well and meaningfully with them. And there's some examples of that.
Righto. So ethnic group, I suppose, if you're going to reach hipsters or the different kind of cultural group as well.
Yeah, sure. All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by R&D? What are some of
research and development,
the crazy things you did that normal churches wouldn't do, for example?
Oh, look, I mean, I think it's a lot of the things that we were involved in are fairly similar to what other churches have tried around the place in the last few decades. But I guess it's the thing of being creative with meeting spaces, you know, church buildings, school halls, you know, cinemas. We were in an underground cinema for a while, cafes, all those sorts of options. To think through where you meet, the style of your meeting, you know, what role does music play? I mean, for a while our church very rarely had music at all. And we had a lot of graphic artists and comic artists and stuff, and so we used lots of visual art, but very little music, you know, and that was just the group of people we kind of reached and connected with and so on. I mean, in terms of evangelism, we tried a whole range of different kinds of tracts, and we had a bunch of circus people, so we did some open-air preaching built around like street performing style presentations with juggling and acrobatics and all this kind of stuff. A whole range of those sorts of things where you just you try different structures, you try different styles of preaching, different styles of outreach, and some of those stick.
Okay. Do you think you'll just with the group that you begin with, your kind of your launch group, will you just naturally attract people like yourself? Is it possible to attract people who are completely different, or should you just kind of realise water always runs downhill and you'll attract people like yourself and just go for it that way?
Yeah, look, I think the gospel forces us not to be exclusive, and so we don't want to be exclusive and limiting and ruling out others. But also our humanness and our embodiedness means inevitably we'll be exclusive. Starting a church in Hobart is exclusive of people in Launceston and Melbourne and Perth, you know. Speaking in English is exclusive of people, how long you speak, what time you meet, you know, there's all those things. Inevitably being in the body means that you're going to be limiting and exclusive to some extent. So yeah, I think especially in the planting and establishing, in that working with the outsider and the new believer, there needs to be a certain degree of tailoring and realism, but you need to always try and get diversity happening with leaders and mature believers in a range of ways. Hey, let me just stop and just reflect a bit on the big picture about how it's all kind of panned out, if I can, Al. I'm just conscious of time. Yeah, so in terms of how it's worked, did it work for us? I mean, the answer is yes, but it was a lot slower and harder than we hoped. And I guess that's the case in most places. You hear these glamour stories of the thing just exploding and being just success upon success. But with us, it's been a slow, steady work. So as I say, across 14 years, there's been 9 church plants that are still with us. And they're largely ranging from 40 to 200 people attending them. So there has been significant growth in that sense. And it's, I mean, hard to get good, consistent statistics because every church measures its attendance or its membership roll differently. But as best as I can glean, we've seen something like a 50% increase across those networks from that initial couple of churches to the 15 now represented. If you just look at the churches that weren't there that now are there, together with their mother churches, it's something like a 50% increase we've seen. So, so it's not, you know, doubling and tripling and quadrupling, but it's still a market increase. And I would really question whether a similar increase would have been seen with those ministries as they were if church planting hadn't been part of the picture. In terms of the numbers of leaders who've raised up, just thinking about people in paid ministry in Tasmania, from around 10 people in 1998 in those network of churches, we now have 20 people in paid ministry raised up from within, an additional 7 brought in from externally, 7 apprentices working in the network each year, and half a dozen or more people sent interstate or overseas doing various paid ministry. So the number of people engaged in paid ministry, not to mention elders and women's workers and volunteers, is extraordinary. The nature of the whole region, the Reformed Church, Christian Reformed Church, the Presbyterian Church of Tasmania, the number of elders and leaders who are the converts and leaders trained within the church plants, I think I'm right in saying is a majority of both of those denominations now, or close to it.
Right.
And amongst those church plants, some in their early years saw a great number of converts, like the Bay Church, Crossroads in its early years, the International Church Ministry, and Seoul Presbyterian Church saw really significant numbers of converts. Most of them, even the ones that failed and were shut down, saw converts as a part of the ministry, and very few of them saw no converts at all. So even on the level of conversions and leadership raised up, even the failed plants tended to make an impact in terms of conversions and connecting with and raising up leaders. So,
Mikey, we've got to go to questions.
Yeah.
Now. I just want to pick up something really important you just said there. You've just said the church plants that failed saw people converted. So as you look back on that, were they failures or were they risks that you took, and after a while, like how would you failure? People are frightened of failing in church ministry work, and I always figure, let's have a go, and if it doesn't work, so were those church plants failures, or how would you, as you look back on it?
Yeah, I like the spirit of the question, and I think often, especially in denominational circles, we talk about the risk of doing something new, but don't talk openly enough about how risky it is to continue to do what we're doing already, to do nothing.
Yes.
It's risky to spend money that we don't have, or to try something new that might fail. But it's also very, very risky in Australia now to just do what we're already doing. We'll be dead in 100 years, sort of thing.
Well, palliative care is usually comfortable in church life.
That's right.
So,
but failure, look, in one sense, in God's sovereign plan and timing, we need to see all things as our faithful efforts to serve him. And when we see fruit even in the midst of failure, I think we can really rejoice and see some good. But I think it's still good to talk about failure as well, in the sense that it's far better to spend all the time, money and energy planting a church that will be established, that will plant other churches, rather than spend all that time, money and energy for a few converts. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So I think it's right to try, it's right to risk, it's right to be willing to fail, and it's great when even those failures bear some fruit, but they're still failures, I think. And for us, we've done soul-searching about going, what could we have done differently in some of those cases to have avoided the failures? And sometimes there are answers to that,
Yes, okay. Mate, we might go to questions. I've got a question from Roger. Here we go. Mikey, are you saying that church plants have less cultural baggage to jettison when it comes to reaching ethnic groups?
They can do. There are different models of church planting. One of the most effective models of church planting is multiplying services or planting with large core groups, hiving off. They're one of the most effective forms of church planting in terms of survivability, but they have a lot more cultural baggage because it's more franchising. You can do lots of effort to try and tweak it, but the risk that you just carry all the cultural baggage of the mother church is higher. Whereas beginning with just the church planter and a very small core group is much more risky, slower going, more likely to fail, but has a higher chance of being quite culturally flexible and adaptable. So I think there's a lot more potential to be cultural flexible, yes. And I guess there's the freedom in starting something new to question lots of assumptions at the beginning, which might take years of political wrangling to change in an established church.
Okay. Yep. Here's one from Glenn. How do you reconcile the picture of the church being the complete people of God with compared to a specific demographic? How do you prevent a church plant from becoming a, quote, boutique church for those who are unhappy at their current church and bring their existing problems? That's a loaded one.
Yeah, I think by being conscious of those exact things. I don't think you don't church plant or don't embrace the inevitable reality that there will be cultural distinctives to the church. I don't think with the former, that's folly because there is an imperative to continue to multiply ministry, and with the latter, it's impossible. So you've got to embrace that we need to church plant, and they will be distinctive, but you become wary of merely marketing to Christians. You become careful with church shoppers and hoppers, and you send them away or consult with their pastor first.
Well, what do you do about
transfer
growth?
It's inevitable.
So do you welcome transfer growth?
Absolutely. I think sometimes the transfer growth, they weren't converted, and in transferring they become Christians. And other times in the transfer they were very inactive and disengaged, and by transferring they become really vigorously engaged in ministry. So there's a time for transfer growth, but you've got to do it in a good, careful, thoughtful way.
Sometimes your transfer growth are just those who are cranky with their own pastor or something?
You've got to weed that out. Or the person who's fleeing church discipline of various kinds, you've got to weed them out and consult directly. And again, that's the great thing of having an interdenominational network, is that you have friendly relations. So you pick up the phone and call and check in and ask if you should pack their bags and send them back rather than accept them with open arms. You've got to do all of those things. Absolutely. But on the other hand, a healthy church that says we are supportive of this new church plant, so we're going to let go of some of our best and brightest and send them with our blessing. I mean, that's impressive. And that's a healthy church.
That's gold, isn't it? That's gold.
Yep.
Okay. So by the way, you're saying to keep good contact and good relationships with the other pastors around is one of the key things, isn't it? To be on the same team with the local guys. Yeah. Here's a question.
And that's the great thing about this Vision 100 network, is we actually have a network of colleagues in ministry. And so really to accept a job in ministry in Tasmania, which we'd love to find others who are keen to join us, is not just to join a job. Ecosystem of gospel ministry, which is, I mean, it's a terrific thing, and geographical advantages of a smaller city and state mean there's actually more face-to-face contact too, which is lovely.
Okay. Here's a question from Drew. I was part of a church plant that targeted a particular social, cultural group, but it ran into trouble when people started asking people from outside that culture. And again, when those people started having kids, it couldn't keep its specific focus. Or is that just natural? Do you want me to read it again? Or
no. It's a great. That's very. Okay. That fits our experience as well, definitely. You're juggling two things the whole time: what will help the outsider, and what will love and serve the people of God who are gathered. You've got to juggle those two things, and sometimes there is a conflict there. Of course, I mean, we must live cross-shaped lives, which means we die to our own preferences for the sake of the lost. So there's pain and a cost. But on the other hand, we do need to love people, and sometimes that might mean setting aside our ambitions as a pastor for efficient evangelism for the sake of loving the people we've got. So I think what happens over time is, churches do become, because the gospel does gather broad people, the churches do become more diverse in terms of age, demographic and culture, and you are inevitably dragged that way. We had to make that decision a couple of times with church plants that were kind of hipster churches. Do we stay hip and relevant and small and niche and fail to reach the broader demographic of people who are coming to us? Do we stay niche or do we broaden? And I think the right thing to do in those cases was when the churches broadened, gave up on some of the cool, hardcore things that they did when they were smaller for the love of the people that had gathered. And in doing that, you create growing momentum and energy in that church so that they're, evangelistically active for a new generation. Whereas I think if you become too niche and stay too niche, in the end, what I've seen those churches becoming is, after a while, they become churches that fit the cultural preferences of the founding group when they were founded.
Yes.
Another side to it is to multiply congregations. We haven't done much of that in Tassie, and we should have done, and that's one of the things we're talking a lot about now. If you multiply congregations within a larger structure of, if you like, mini churches as a part of a larger church structure, you're able to say, offer a morning service for the people who are beginning to have kids while preserving some of the distinctives of an afternoon or evening service for young adults, and while still having a diversity across the whole thing.
Yeah, you grow older. It's hard to be a hipster when you've got 4 kids in a Tarago, isn't it? It's just kind of like, and you've got to allow for that with new congregations. And anyway, let me give you another one. Andrew asks this: the examples of demographics that church plants target are usually, quote, trendy ones like international students, hipsters, etc. Is it sustainable to target the marginalised, drug addicts, ex-prisoners, housing commission, etc., or do we need an affluent core before reaching these people?
There's a bunch of things in there. Yes, you do need an affluent core, so that's good, and that's needed, and whether that's a mother church or a denomination, the money's coming from somewhere to prop up those other ministries. So yes. Do most church plants target the trendy? It's nice to hear international students are now trendy. That's a newer cultural thing. 10 or 15 years ago they weren't, but now everyone under 30 wants to be Asian deep down inside. I question whether that's the case. I think we hear a lot about those plants because they make for good press, and because they are often where there's growth happening, and so they grow rapidly. And so we perceive that that's all that's happening, but I mean, across the Geneva network, that's just not the reality, is it, Al? I mean, we just got all sorts, and there's a handful of those trendy hipster ones, but only a handful.
But most of them are just kind of bread and butter.
Just loving and serving marginalised and struggling and immigrants and single mums, all that stuff. And even those trendy churches have those people in them and love them and serve them and uphold them. So, I'd question the assumption in the question. But yeah, planting those other grim, struggling, like the extreme end, that is hard, and it's hard everywhere, and people struggle to do it. Churches struggle to do it. Our society struggles to do it. Everyone struggles to do it. If you're a lower class doctor, caseworker, business owner, church planter, that's a human problem. It's not just a church snob middle class problem.
Do you think you need someone with a real heart to reach the marginalised? And that's how you just, if you're going to reach a particular group, it does take your founding pastor that God's just put that absolute burden on his heart.
Yeah, I think increasingly nowadays we talk about how they need to be blue-collar people and rough-and-ready people. I question that. I think you send someone to a rural or poorer area who's a doctor, they're a white-collar person. They're a white-collar doctor, but they have a heart and a concern to use their white-collar profession to love and serve people who are struggling. So that can be the same in ministry. You can have a white-collar preacher who has the heart and the integrity and the love. So I don't think you need to be rough as guts yourself necessarily, or have been from that background yourself. But you've got to have the heart and the gifts to do that ministry, and the fund's got to come from somewhere to uphold it for a longer time.
Yep. Okay, here's one from Shelley. Demographics are important, but what about location of a church plant? Are there locations which you would not recommend for church plants? Are some locations better than others for success?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? I mean, that you've got to ask it. But there's so many factors there. That the location of the meeting of the church service on the Sunday is one element, and that can help or hinder. If it's really hard to find, if you're running a uni church that's through a door that you need to be buzzed into, and then up a stairs and down a corridor, deep in the heart of a dark campus at night time, that's pretty hard to access, isn't it? Or a church building in a cul-de-sac, So there's those on the logistics of where your meeting is on a Sunday, but then there's the suburb or the region you're in. And that again, of course, that's which region or suburb you're in will affect the plant. It's interesting that often mega churches, just by nature of real estate, have to go out to suburbs, and so people drive a long way to get there, don't they? So you don't assume that people want to go to a church next door to their home. They might be happy to drive a long time or go to a church near their work or near their recreation. Yeah, and that's another factor. I mean,
Right.
people are psychologically, at least depending on the city, sometimes more inclined and happier to drive a long distance in to the
Yes.
centre than they are to
Yes.
drive across to another suburb or
Yes.
out to another suburb. So that you've got to bear in mind all those factors, but that differs
Yeah.
from city to city. I mean, Sydney's a string of small city villages, isn't it? Whereas Melbourne has or Brisbane have much more tangible city centres at the actual centre
Yeah.
of the metropolis. So, yeah, each place is
Yeah.
different. Then there's weird things like a highway or a river or an area of forest that becomes psychological blockers for the people.
Yeah. So it's not really a formula, is it? It's the vibe. It's what's in the heads of the people you're trying to reach in terms of distance, location,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a church plant, Mount Stewart Presbyterian Church. It's in a suburb. It's named after a suburb. It meets in a school. The number of people who go to that church who live 20 minutes plus drive away, which is a long time to drive in Hobart, in another suburb altogether. I mean, there's quite a large number, So that's an example where, the name belies the reality.
Okay. Yeah. All right, so it's a good question. It's know your people, know your location. Here's another one from Andrew. Church planters all seem like pretty self-confident people. How important is confidence in your own ability to plant a church?
That's a great question. Again, the church planters in practice differ a lot more. Again, the people who might get the press are the people who are naturally come across as self-confident, but again, the diversity is more significant. I honestly believe that this sounds like a pious answer, but confidence in the saving power of God and His gospel is the marker, and that creates a drivenness and a conviction in some people. Some people who have that unique, you might say that's what the scriptures mean by the gift of faith, just that really striking confidence and conviction, and that can make them compelling preachers even if they're oratorically dull, because they obviously mean what they say,
Yep.
And they believe it and they live it and they take sacrifices for it. So I think that is a real marker, and that sacrificial thing. But being confident in yourself, yeah, that's a lot of things, isn't it? That's being confident to speak in public so that it's not awkward when you speak up the front. I think that helps people listen to you and want to bring others to listen to you. So that's a confidence in your own skin, which makes you able to be warm and courteous in personal relationships. That helps, again, create a community vibe and draw in a team. And enough skill and bravado to be decisive. That mix of I know how to do this or I'm going to give it a shot. You need that to be decisive, I think, don't you? If you have someone who's indecisive, wary, cautious, uncertain, it's very hard to run at the speed and be flexible in the ways you need to in starting something new.
Yeah, you do. I think you do need to be prepared to take risks. That's the,
Yeah.
And I guess I know they're asking you the question, not me, but there's a level of emotional resilience as well. You got to get, you get knocked down. You got to be able to get up and go again. It's just, yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. That resilience or grit.
Yeah, yeah, or just plain pig-headedness.
Stupidity.
Yes, that's it. One from Mark. How important is the leadership team to the success of a church plant? Will a church plant only work if the leadership team is confident and united?
Yeah, very important. To stick around, you talk to people who stick around trying to change church from the grassroots up. Or we've met through Geneva people who make contact with us, don't they, Al, who are kind of student ministers or lay leaders who are sort of somehow trying to plant a church when there's no paid minister, or the paid minister isn't in support of it, and there's a lot of strife there. There's a lot of I mean, the likelihood of those things sticking and lasting is very, very low. God establishes structures of leadership. There should be servant leadership, yes, and they should favour the weak and the marginalised, yes, but He still establishes structures of leadership, and you changing things one heart at a time is not the whole story. You change things one heart at a time, but you need to change structures and leaders, and if you can't do that, one heart at a time will just create a whole lot of frustrated hearts under an incompetent leadership. So yes, leaders are very important. United leaders with a shared value and investing a lot of time getting that right early. Yeah, it is not wasted time. Spending a lot of time on picking the leaders, investing in the leaders, training the leaders, and holding things off until you got the leader. That's just really crucial. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to carry on, follow on that one, but Alan, we said we'd answer people's questions, so here we go. This is a question from Alan. How much does a network?
Have you just made your own question there?
No. It's Alan with two L's. Here we go. Is it genuine? Although I'm smiling as I read it. How much does a network like Geneva direct people towards where church planters are needed, as opposed to where church planters want to go? The reason I smile is this has come up a lot at different Geneva meetings. So anyway.
Oh, it has, hasn't it? Largely, it's where they want to go, but not entirely, is it? So just recently, we've got Liam Doyle, who was kind of connected with a core group of people who wanted to start a church in Morisset, up in the kind of Lakes region in New South Wales, and he got connected in with that and went that direction and connected in with that and so on. So it's not entirely us just assessing and empowering people to do what they were going to do anyway. And again, the advantage of regional networks like Vision 100 and national networks like Geneva is that you can make people aware of needs and join the right person to the right place. We don't have a master plan, do we, with like a map and a little kind of figurines that we were moving all over the war map kind of thing. It's messier than that.
It is.
But it happens, and the possibility for it to happen is enhanced by a network. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. One of the joys of a network is that you can get a young couple who are really fired up, and you can see their gifts, and then you're able to show them a range of options and connect them with resources and people. Sometimes, and also people turn up and they're absolutely certain where they want to go and what they want to do. And I'll just shut up because we're asking you the questions, Mikey.
Yeah, I mean, we're serving denominations and networks and church planting mother churches and all those things. You know, we're kind of saying, look, let's serve you with assessment procedures and external coaches and kind of vision giving and training structures for the mother church that already has a plan. Or for the denomination that already has a plan. So, you know, we're doing that service as well as connecting with individuals and so on.
Yep. Okay. Now, we've got time for a couple more. Here's one from Caroline. How much time did Mikey put into the process of knowing and then going? What advice does he have for church planters making the choice to go to one region or area as opposed to another?
In our case, as I described with our history, it was very much a work of God in conversions that led to churches being started and just continuing that work. So that largely the momentum was kind of organic, if you like, or spontaneous. I mean, as we've started new churches, there's been more of a tendency towards that is if you're going to sustain the thing beyond that initial organic rush, you do need to think through a bit more and get a little better at thinking through the next place and the statistics and the demographics. So, yeah, you've got to put some effort into it, but in another sense, you don't really know until you've gone there and started doing it, and then sometimes you have to kind of repackage and redo everything because now you finally know what the place is actually like, and all your initial guesses from a distance weren't quite right. So we had a church planter with the Geneva network that I've been coaching who made a bunch of assumptions about how to reach his suburb, and then you know, I must meet in a school hall, must kind of flee this, that, and the other. And then after a while, began to realise, hang on, a lot of people in my suburb come from Catholic backgrounds and quite like established churches. And so we should actually embrace our denominational heritage and meet in a church building. And that will actually be more attractive to the non-Christians we're trying to connect with, you know. So
he's planning a church in a church building?
Yeah.
Really? Amazing. There you go.
So, yeah, there's that sense in which you... you know, you put that work in, but then on the other hand, you got to be prepared that you don't ever reach the stars. You just kind of navigate by them, don't you? So things change all the time.
Oh, nice, Mikey, nice. Navigate. Okay,
Uh,
here we go. David's nice analogy. David asked a question. Say I pastor a mainstream church and I'm convicted of the need to plant churches, but my congregation is less so. Do I work with them? Do I look for someone else to support? What's the way forward?
I think both. I think you need to preach and teach and mentor to give that vision, and to the church, and take your time to do that. So don't feel it has to happen tomorrow, but to slowly build that vision, expose people to that need. The work of raising leaders and multiplying ministries within the church is how you prepare a church for church planting. So begin to multiply small groups, multiply Sunday school classes, multiply services on a Sunday. Think, what are other ways I can multiply ministry and multiply ministries, so that actually church planting really is just a logical extension of that. I think that's the other thing. But yeah, bringing others in is a great thing. I was talking with another pastor who's exploring opportunities to build a gospel ministry fund with wealthy members of his church, because that, in a sense, gives the church a capacity to invest in ministries beyond just the line item budget, that the church or the parish council or the elders or whoever are managing. So you can bring in staff or leaders or supporters to invest in gospel ministry in your parish or region. Parallel, if you like, to the ministry to that existing congregation. So I do a bit of both: invest in the congregation, but explore ways to start parallel gospel ministry with the help of others.
Okay. And I suppose what you start new doesn't have to be huge. You can just kind of start something. Yeah, you have to start small and grow it. Okay, here's a long one. Okay, listening from Andrew. Ready? It's a little bit of an essay, but I'll read it as clearly as I can. Can you talk on an alternative model to planting lots of churches, which is the big church model? Our church started with a vision for 50 churches in 50 years, but we realised a few years ago that planting churches is a resource-heavy form of multiplying ministries, i.e. sending your best people, finding enough venues in the region, etc. Now we're working on a model of multiplying ministries within a large church, planting new congregations, mission outreach to specific people groups. What do you think is the factor that leads to lots of little struggling church plants versus big church planting, lots of new ministries?
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
And we've got 3 minutes, Mikey.
Yeah, look, you can glorify the small, struggling, unthought through church planting thing, and I think we've done a bit of that in our history, where you go, I haven't really thought about it, I'm just going to do it, and it probably won't work, let's just do that. And that becomes wasteful, exhausting, burns people out, and so on. I think giving thought and care and attention to church planting, just as you would to your sermon preparation, your theological education, your church budget, your child protection, all these other things we give thought and care to. Let's give thought and care to our church planting as well, so that you can plant healthy churches that will go on to plant churches. I don't think we've done that as well as we could. So you need to do that, so you aren't planting small, struggling churches, but you're planting healthy churches that will go on to plant others. And yes, there's great advantages to larger churches, so that the assumption that church plant must mean 50 adults and 30 kids, and by the time it gets to 100 adults, you must start another one. Let's not make that the assumption. Why not build up the church plants, if God allows them to a larger size, and then both multiply ministries within that larger church and church plant. I don't think it needs to be mega church or multi-churches. Why not both? Mega churches that multiply churches.
Yep, I agree. So Geneva doesn't push a particular philosophy or structure of ministry. There's great freedom in terms of the network, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And along that whole process, asking questions of whatever model someone chooses, and say, well, how are you going to cater for the the risks there. If you're going to go for small, how are you going to make sure they stay healthy and viable rather than struggling? How are you going to build a network between those small churches so that you do have the resources to multiply ministries and the ability to share venues, so that you don't kind of end up fighting over a decreasing number of school halls? You know, like if you're going to go for a different model, how are you going to cope with the weaknesses of that model? If you're going with the megachurch thing, how are you going to make sure that you actually continue to reach out and expand outward and start new things and reach groups that may not help the kind of growth imperative of the big church, but are good for the health of the gospel? You know, all those things. I mean, we ask questions and prod people on how they're going to make up for the weaknesses of chosen models, rather than kind of giving a template. A Geneva church is this.
Okay. Yes, exactly. Quick one from Ollie, and we're getting towards the end, so we'll push you through as many questions as we can. Ollie asks,
any questions that are left over as well, I'll try and answer over email over the next week or so fear not.
Okay. Ollie asks, is it as simple as planting more churches, or do those congregations themselves have to have a different attitude as well, so that they will be able to replicate themselves?
I'm not 100% sure what you're asking, Ollie, but if what you're saying is, do we need to, is it just enough to get a new group of people meeting in a new place at a new time? No, that's not enough. I would say, or it's unwise at the very least. That the goal is to make sure you plant that church on a trajectory to be a healthy church planting church. So you've got to be thinking through from the very outset, how is it going to be a healthy church, including an outward looking one? And I think ideally, how will I plant it in such a way that it will be on a trajectory to plant its own churches?
Okay. We'll have to go. The last question now is from John. Mikey, there's lots of ways of evangelising Australians, lots of forms that ministries can take. What do you think church planting offers in particular? What do you think church planting offers in particular?
Very little in particular. I think church planting is the fruit of healthy evangelistic ministry. I think as you multiply ministry and multiply converts, it gathers people into churches. So it's the fruit of healthy ministry. Because healthy ministry is a united whole, it can be the first step to doing more healthy ministry. So you don't need to wait for it to be the fruit of it down the track, but you can begin with that step in the process. You know, healthy ministry includes raising up leaders, maturing believers, seeing evangelism happen, establishing churches, and so on. So you can begin at any one of those points, and so I don't think church planting is really just the extreme end of healthy evangelistic ministry. And I guess, like with any extreme end of things, such as overseas mission, you need to invest extra resource to make sure the extreme end of it happens, and so you don't just stay in the kind of the shallows.
Okay.
Right.
Well, Mikey, as always, a great pleasure talking with you. You push my thinking every time we talk. Thank you very much for being with us, and I'll hand this webinar back to Ben, who's the brains of the operation.
Al, you're far too kind. Mikey and Al, thank you so much for your time this morning and for discussing the ins and outs of church planning. Is it worth it? I hope that everyone being part of the webinar today got as much out of Mikey's answers as I did. Now, before I sign off, I'd just like to point you to our next webinar, the next planner session that's coming up. It is, how you get the money together. It's happening on Thursday, June 19. And with us, our special guest will be EV Church's Andrew Hurd, who'll be talking about how you get the money together for a church plant. Because we all know that it's important to have a heart for Christ, get our theology right, get some people together for a church plant. But money is another realistic and tough component of church planting. So we're going to have Andrew with us on June 19 to give us valuable insights into how, obviously trusting under God's provision, we can go about raising the funds for church planting. It's a vital topic. It's something we need to discuss. We're going to have Andrew with us on June 19. This week, we'll be sending you out a link to how you can register for that upcoming webinar. Keep an eye out for it. Now, thanks again for joining us. And again, you'll be receiving an email also from us that's going to alert you to the on-demand status of today's event so that you can review any material you missed out on, or just so you can send it around and share it with your friends. Now, thanks again also to EA Insurance, who are putting their support behind the Planter Sessions. EA helps out hundreds of Christians and community not-for-profits with their insurance needs. So, again, if you've got any insurance questions for your church plant, Geneva highly recommends you get in contact with EA. Go to ea.org.au. On behalf of our guest, Mikey Lynch, and our host, Al, as well as the whole team at Geneva Push, thank you very much for joining us. My name is Ben McEachern. Hope you have a great day, and be with us again on June 19 for Andrew's webinar on how you get the money together.